Welcome everyone to the International Conference on Children and Their Families using the multiple indicator cluster surveys. I'm Eva Quintana. I work with the mixed team, and I will be chairing today's session on child protection, birth registration, and child discipline. My co-chair today is Enrique Delamonica. He's a senior advisor at the data and analytics team at UNICEF headquarters. And before I introduce our speakers, I'm going to just share a few words of housekeeping. This session will be recorded and hosted on the UNICEF Mix website and YouTube channel, as well as on the BPI, the Bristol Poverty Institute YouTube channel, and embedded on the BPI website after this event. By attending, you consent to be part of this recording. Please ensure that you have added your name rather than being listed as guest, as the team will be monitoring attendees, and we also need to know who is asking our speakers questions. You will be able to ask questions via the QA function on the top of your screen. Please note your questions as you know throughout the presentations. Due to time constraints, we may not be able to answer every question, but please feel free also to leave your questions and get in touch with the speakers after session to continue the conversation if needed. Now, please note that the chat function is not available to attendees, and that you only have you have to post your questions through the Q&A function. Finally, I'd just like to remind everyone to please be respectful. All the events in this conference are being monitored, and and we reserve the right to also remove attendees whose comments are deemed offensive or derogatory. Okay, so I'd like to start then by giving the floor to, we have 3 presentations today, and we will be starting with a presentation by John McLennan from University of Calgary, and which is entitled Problems with the Mixed Module Measuring Child Exposure to Discipline and Violence in the Home. The floor is yours, John.
Thank you. Let me see if I can pull up the slides again. You can see my slides okay? Yes, slides are okay. Okay, I'm going to go. So this is my outline for today. I'm going to talk a little bit about the child discipline module, its links to the SDG, and then talk a little bit about the origins of the items, the problems, and some suggested directions. So, some folks will be very familiar with this, but if not, we'll go over this a few points here. So questions are asked in the mixed questionnaire of a primary adult caregiver in the home, typically the mother. And these questions are asked about specific select children 1 to 14 years of age in the household. And there's a series of questions about child discipline, and they're framed as follows. Adults use certain ways to teach children the right behavior or to address a behavior problem. I will read various methods that are used. Please tell me if you or any other adult in your household has used this method with the select child in the past month. There are then 11 questions typically about different exposures, and the response options are yes or no. If, for example, the child was spanked, hit, or slapped on the bottom with bare hands. And the 11 items are often grouped into 3 categories. So there's 6 items that ask specifically around sort of physical punishments like the one above. There's 2 items that are categorized or labeled as psychological aggression. And there's 3 items that are categorized as nonviolent discipline. And there's various metrics that can be derived from these 11 questions. So one popular one that's used is the child has been exposed to any physical punishment, and this is based on a yes response to any of the 6 individual questions. Also often reported in mixed reports are any psychological regression. This is aggression. This is based on a yes response to either of the two questions. And then any violent discipline, which is based on a yes response to either or any of the 6 physical punishment questions or any of the psychological aggression questions. So a single yes will classify that child as being exposed to violent discipline, and this directly informs indicator SDG 16.2.1, which is the proportion of children aged 1 to 17 who experience any physical punishment and or psychological aggression by caregivers in the past month. And indicator 16.2.1, of course, informs target 16.2, which is to end abuse, exploitation, trafficking, all forms of violence against and torture of children. Of course, this one's focused on sort of violence in the home. There'd be other indicators to address the other issues, and falling under the very broad SDG 16 about promoting peaceful, inclusive societies, etc. So the origin of these items. So the items in the mixed discipline module are drawn from a questionnaire called the Parent-Child Conflict Tactics Scale that was developed by Strauss and colleagues in 1998. This instrument was the original instrument. The Conflict Tactics Scale was developed in the United States as part of a larger research agenda that was focused on studying conflict within families. In fact, the original one was looking at conflict between couples, and then it was extended to this parent-child conflict tactics scale. That is, it was not an instrument developed to measure disciplinary practices by parents throughout the world or violence exposure more broadly. The mixed module is a subset of questions, so it's not all the questions in the parent-child conflict tactics scales. It's not completely obvious what the decision-making was on which items were selected. There was also a truncation of the response options down to yes, no, and mix, but the original there's different versions, but typically it asks about frequency within a period of time. So was the child spanked in the last week or month? 0 times, 1 to 2, 3 to 5, etc. That kind of a frequency or an estimated frequency count. There does not seem to be, or at least I haven't identified any published fieldwork on the development or assessment of the mixed discipline module. In the Carragher article in 2012 about fieldwork, there's some mention of exploration of disciplinary practices, although that article mostly focused on early childhood development measures. There was some mention of sort of the complexity of getting at parenting discipline, and then it seems that early attempt at field work to inform the questionnaire may have been dropped, and then there was a decision to adopt components of an existing instrument. I've not yet seen published reports on the psychometric properties of the mixed discipline module. Rather, people that publish on this tend to cite the psychometric properties of the original parent-child conflict tactics scale, which is a bit of a stretch given that it's a subset, truncated response options, and used in sort of new environments. So hence, there may be some problems, and there may be risks given to the lack of fieldwork or psychometric sort of studies. So some of the issues that may come up are, do the items in the mixed disciplinary module adequately capture the range of disciplinary practices used in the many LMICs where this module is used, or more broadly, violence exposure in the home, which may go beyond disciplinary practices. And so one of the examples I use here is we've looked at the data from Haiti. And so Haiti has not mixed data, but they have DHS data. And they did use the mixed module in their last DHS survey, but someone included additional, I think maybe at the country level, included several additional items, presumably reflective of sort of local practice. And one of the items is forced kneeling as a punishment, which ends up being very common in Haiti. In fact, more common than most of the physical discipline items asked in the mixed module. I'm assuming that forced kneeling is not unique to Haiti, so it may be occurring in other locations, but we won't know because it's not in the standard set. Enforced kneeling can be quite harsh, so descriptions of kneeling in the sun, kneeling on hard surfaces with weights and things like that. So certainly it may be something that ought to be sort of further explored. And that's sort of one example. There, of course, may be other examples that we don't know about because there hasn't been maybe the associated field work. The one other example that comes to mind in the parent-child conflict tactic scale work in the US, one of the most common disciplinary tactics is threat to hit. But that's also not included, but one that presumably is not unique to the United States. Another question is, do the items have the same meaning across country, language group, sort of culture? So certainly I appreciate there's efforts in translation and in back translation. These are complex constructs, and it's not obvious that the items, and some of them are worded somewhat awkwardly, that they would necessarily capture the same construct in different setting, leading to questions about comparability. There's also a question about how accurately do caregivers report. Reports reflect actual practices, so questions about validity. And then there's questions about reliability. So what about inter-rater reliability, say between the mother and father or two different caregivers, or issues of test-retest reliability. There are issues in reporting on sort of mental health, sort of behavior. So I would suspect that's going to be an issue here. Another important issue is how sensitive is this measure to identify change? And this is, I think, a fairly big one, given that it's identified as an indicator of some concerning practices, which we hope will be reduced over time as a function of policy or services or educational interventions, but can it pick up sort of meaningful change? And so I just have this hypothetical example just to sort of flesh this out. So let's say at time one, on average, 50% of kids in country X are hit with a belt 4 times in a month. Then there's an intervention to reduce hitting. And at time 2, no children are hit with a belt, but on average, 50% of children are spanked on the bottom with an open hand 1 time per month. This, I think, in the field would be an enormous success of reduction, but it wouldn't be detected by all other things being equal. It would not be detected by SDG 16.2.1 or even any physical punishment, the way it's sort of scored. So that's kind of, I think, a pretty big problem. Some suggested directions, then I'll finish up. I think it's never too late to invest in improving a measure. I appreciate that's easier said than done, and this is only one module amongst sort of many, and it's hard. But the other area that I work in related to mix is on the drinking water module, and it's really had some huge and important evolution, based partly on sort of weaknesses of early measures. So there was this emphasis on classifying households as having improved and unimproved water, which was identified as being quite weak and problematic. And then there was consequently this really some important field work, some expansion to the point of including sort of water quality testing, which was a huge sort of burden, the drinking water service ladder. So this important development in a long-standing item. I use as an example that, movement could be made in the discipline measure as well. I'm particularly struck at really some of the work that was done decades and decades ago on informing surveys of childhood diarrhea. So there was important documents, publications on the use of rapid ethnographic assessments by Bentley and other colleagues to get in there first to do some important field work to inform surveys on, in that case, childhood diarrhea. There's subsequent work on pneumonia with sort of similar strategies, the development of manuals on how to do rapid ethnographic work that certainly could be used for the discipline. And I would argue that discipline is a pretty complex construct, more complicated, I would argue, than childhood diarrhea. So even more need to do sort of field work to sort of get it right. We're doing a small sort of study attempting to do this in the Dominican Republic. So we're doing fieldwork sort of currently to explore the sort of breadth of disciplinary practices and how they line up with the existing sort of mixed discipline module. We'll be following that by a reliability study, looking at the structure of different discipline questions, looking at inter-rater reliability and test-retest. And I'm hopeful that we'll see other fieldwork efforts in other countries and can pool those to sort of inform advancing this measure. And I will stop there. Happy to share slides and references. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John. This is a very important question that I think, we as a mixed team, we are facing continuously as, there are development, some of these modules that we have in mix have been released and have been used for many years, but were like maybe launched like 10, 15 years ago, some of them even more. As you have noted, like we have made efforts to, improving some of the existing measures. There's still currently ongoing, efforts to improve others existing, like the foundational learning module, that we constantly are working to improve the measures and mix, the instruments, and also align them with evolution in the respective fields. And definitely there's a lot of work still to do. And so I think this is very interesting and getting feedback from data users and, and pointing out some of the limitations of the instruments and contributing with, the work that you're doing. This is really, I think it is very, very important. So, and I hope, we will have a chance to discuss more during the Q&A session. Thank you very much. So I think our next presenter is Manar Abdel-Rahman from Qatar University. And her presentation is on child disciplinary practices and how they vary by household head education in Middle Eastern and North African countries. Manar, please, the floor is yours.
Yes, hello. You can hear me, yeah? Yes, okay. So my name is Manar. I'm a professor of biostatistics at Qatar University, Department of Public Health, College of Health Sciences. I am also working as a consultant for UNICEF, as a household survey expert for South Asia. And I have previously worked in the Middle East and North Africa region in the same capacity. So my presentation today, or this research, is focusing on answering the question, do child discipline methods vary by household head education in Middle Eastern and North African countries? This is an ongoing research and it has not been published, and this is the contents of my presentation. So I think my presentation is placed timely after John's explaining the child discipline module and the distinction between non-violent methods and violent methods, which are further characterized into psychological aggression and physical punishment, and which can also be either minor physical punishment or severe physical punishment. Well, worldwide, violent discipline is quite prevalent. But we can also say that non-violent methods are more commonly used overall. The choice of disciplinary methods has an impact on child development, as have been shown in a number of researches around the world. Now, focusing on the Middle East and North Africa region, 84% were subjected of children 2 to 14 years were subjected to violent discipline. 80% experienced psychological aggression. 70% experienced physical punishment. So it's quite prevalent in this area as well. 7 MENA countries were ranked among the 20 highest countries in regard to violent discipline. In terms of the region, globally, the Middle Eastern or North Africa region or the MENA region and Sub-Saharan Africa regions has the highest prevalence of physical aggression. There are many factors influencing the use of disciplinary methods, among which is education, and a number of studies have looked at caregivers' education in relation to its association with the disciplinary methods. Other factors include the child age and gender, and the caregiver's past exposure to violent discipline, and also beliefs, wealth, neglect and abuse, political violence and immigration status, unemployment status, and there are also social and cultural factors that can affect this association. As I mentioned, a number of studies have looked at the association between disciplinary practices and caregivers' education. For example, this is a recent publication done on Sub-Saharan Africa, which found that high levels of education of both parents were less likely to adopt physically violent practices relative to those with low levels of education. And the converse was found also to be true. Similarly, in MENA regions, caregivers with lower educational status tend to use harsh discipline more frequently when compared to educated caregivers. Now, the design of the child discipline module asks whether the mother or caregiver or any adult in the household has used the disciplinary method. Most of the research that was done already was focusing on the association of the disciplinary methods with the parent or caregiver education. But education of the head of the household may also influence the disciplinary culture in the house, particularly in extended families where are seen in Middle East and Africa countries, and maybe in other regions as well, where any adult actually in the household can discipline the child. So there is some lack of research in focusing on the education of the household, of the head of the household, which can be leading the culture of how the disciplinary methods are done in the house. So the aim of this study is to assess the association between child discipline methods and the education of the head of the household in selected countries in the MENA region. And we hypothesize that children in households with educated heads are subjected to decreased use of violent methods and increased use of non-violent methods of discipline. We also hypothesize that these differences may vary by country. The study participants include parents or primary caregivers of children aged 1 to 14 from 4 countries, as I mentioned, Iraq, Palestine, Tunisia, and Algeria. These are the countries from the most recently available Mix 6 data, so that have implemented the child discipline module in the MENA region, and these were conducted between 2018 and 2020. So out of the different items, this research considers 6 outcomes highlighted in red. So the first one is any positive discipline, including yes to if I would say if the caregiver or the mother or anyone, any adult in the household explained why the behavior was wrong or gave the child something else to do. The second outcome is only non-violent discipline, which includes took away privileges. So the first indicator here is considering emotional punishment as a form of a violent discipline. The third indicator is any psychological aggression, any physical discipline, any severe violent discipline, and any violent discipline, which is, as mentioned earlier, is also the SDG indicator. We will be considering the education of head of household as the exposure. In terms of statistical analysis, data from the 4 countries were mutually pooled in an overall data set. And to be able to do this while considering the complex survey design, we have denormalized the child weight by dividing it by the child survey sampling fraction. And that was obtained by dividing the number of children 1 to 14 interviewed by the total number of children in the same age group in the country at the time of the survey, and we got this denominator from the United Nations Population Division by looking at their population sizes, which was single year, available for single year. We used Pearson chi-square statistic corrected for the survey design. We used modified Poisson regression and binary logistic regression to model our data. We also included assessments of interactions. We adjusted for individual children, household, and country levels in looking at the association between the outcomes and our main exposures. This is the summary of the mixed data sets included, the 4 countries, Iraq, Palestine, Tunisia, and Algeria. The number of households interviewed varied across countries, as is obvious here. Algeria had the highest, largest sample size, and Palestine has the smallest. We looked at associations.
5 minutes left, Manar. Just wanted to let you know. Thank you.
Good. So we looked at associations between the education of the head of the household and other characteristics, and they were all statistically significant. In regard of the prevalence of disciplinary methods, we can see from this that the 2 indicators, any psychological and any violent discipline, had high prevalence, where any positive and only non-positive had lower prevalence. And in terms of associations between the education of the head of the household, there was only a clear decreasing trend for any severe. So these are just looking at preferences. When we looked at the multivariable models, we have, as I mentioned, we have adjusted for, I'm just going to present the last model, which is model 4, adjusting for all factors considered. We see that higher education of the head of the household was associated with an increased use of any positive and only non-violent discipline. On the contrary, for any psychological, any physical, any severe, any violent discipline, we have this negative association. Okay, although the effect sizes are not that strong, but they were statistically significant. Here we are looking at the interaction, and we have also observed differences by countries, clear differences by countries, where predicted probabilities were differing based on the country. Now, psychological and violent disciplinary methods are highly prevalent regardless of the education level of head of the household. This might be attributed to influence of cultural and social norms. And then, as we have seen, higher education of the head of the household head was significantly associated with an increased risk, with an increased use of positive and non-violent discipline, and a decreased use of physical, severe, violent, and psychological aggression and violent methods. And this is consistent with studies in MENA countries and also in other sub-Saharan countries and in other studies as well. Variation, as I mentioned, across countries. This is consistent with other studies, and this could be attributed to the differences in cultural norms, societal attitudes towards discipline, media law, and regulations between MENA countries. Now, strengths of this study is that in MENA countries, disciplining children might not be confined to parents or caregivers. So when we are considering the education of the head of the household, we are encompassing the design of the child discipline module, which asks about the use of methods by any other adults in the household. One of the other strengths is that we are using the pooled analysis, pooling the data, so we have increased power. This is my last slide. In conclusion, high rates of psychological and violent discipline in the MENA region may increase mental, behavior, and social problems in future generations. Rapid action to reduce the prevalence of violent discipline and its associated consequences. We should, educational interventions should be done to promote healthier discipline methods, and also further research is needed considering the diverse cultural perspectives in the MENA region. These are my references, and thank you very much for listening. I hope I haven't gone over the
just perfect timing.
Thank
you. Thank you very much, Manar. And last but not least, I'm going to now give the floor to Selsah Pasali, who is from the Social Development Division at ESCAP. The floor is yours, Alas.
Thank you very much, Eva. I think the slides are loading. Can you guys all see? Yep, okay. So good evening from Bangkok. Happy to be here. My co-author, I don't think she was able to join, but happy to present our publication on birth registration. So we're still sticking to SDG 16, but a different indicator, SDG 16.9. We've been talking about this at ESCAP for a while on CRVS, that I realize now that I didn't really put any definition on this, but I'll quickly clarify that for everyone who may not be familiar with this indicator. So I'll talk a little bit about our methodology at ESCAP, the LNOB methodology and our platform. Then I'll show which surveys we're using, main results, and all the implications that will come afterwards. So what is ESCAP LNOB analysis? We've developed an empirical analysis to identify inequality of opportunity and gaps in access to key opportunities and services, with an exclusive emphasis on SDG indicators. So what we adopted is an efficient disaggregation tool that's able to capture intersectionalities among individual and household circumstances that leave people behind. So we're focusing on SDGs, and we're trying to disaggregate them in a way that captures those intersectionalities. We're using in this analysis only nationally representative household surveys, so MICS and DHS are bread and butter because they're publicly accessible, but many countries are sharing their other surveys, some even giving us their census data. So we're kind of like compiling a large body of national representative surveys and census in Asia and the Pacific. So the algorithm comes from classification and regression tree analysis, which is one part of the analysis, and it's part of this large umbrella methodology card. And then we also use dissimilarity index, which I think has been mostly used in racial segregation studies. But when it comes to access to opportunities, we also see, I think World Bank was leading the use of this recently. So we developed a platform because we realized that when you have so much data and so many indicators that the results are available at national or subnational level, you end up with having thousands and thousands of results. So you can't really write a paper about this, and that we want policymakers to have access to all these different results from their countries, where they choose their country, the indicators that they care about, and also the year of the survey. And we keep seeing that policymakers are using this to understand whom to prioritize for interventions when they're looking at different SDGs. We covered 19 SDG indicators, and birth registration is one of them. And countries are also using this tool as they monitor and also report on their SDG achievements, which they do every year, by the way. So within the big umbrella methodology of classification and regression trees, we use binary regression trees using analysis of variance to guide us in disaggregating an SDG indicator. So this is completely diagnostic. We don't do anything predictive, and we're looking at past data and trying to kind of like minimize variance in identifying mutually exclusive groups, and for whom there are different access rates. So one example here is coming from Lao People's Democratic Republic, using their mixed 2017 birth registration is the indicator where the parents or the mother or the father is asked about if the child was registered. They also inquire if the birth certificate exists and if it was seen by the enumerator. Different countries have different, I think, preferences of which number they go after, but we always stick to the one that they use in reporting on the SDGs. So what you see here is a binary regression tree. For short, we call it the LNOB tree. It starts with the 58% national birth registration completion rate. So 58% of children, this is children under 5, to clarify, are registered. And then we are trying to find who's worst off and who's best off. And in this tree, I won't go too much into detail, and I don't expect everyone to get this in short period of time, but what we try to find is really the worst of and the best of, and everyone in between, of course, but we're particularly focusing on the furthest behind, so the ones who have the lowest birth registration completion rate. And in this case, what we find is that boys with at least one sibling whose mother is lower educated and live in poorer households, bottom 40% of the wealth distribution, are worst off. About 1/3 of them are registered, as opposed to children living in urban and richer households, where about 85% are registered. So then what we find is that this 58% was the national average, but then you have this giant gap between those who was furthest ahead, 85% of children registered, and 32% of children registered. And there's this gap that we track. So we do this for all countries for which there's data, and I'll shortly show you the results. But this is what the CART methodology is giving us. And when you come to our platform, for all the 19 indicators, you can see these type of results at national, subnational level for all the SDGs that we have data for. And we use Mix and DHS for this. The Similarity Index, part of World Bank's Human Opportunity Index, and it's a way of measuring demographic evenness in access to an opportunity. It's highly used for binary outcome indicators. Here's the formula. It helps us to identify how different groups in the country is deviating from the national average. And this is discounted by their respective weight in the or the share of the population. And so this is giving us one number, 0 to 1 range, like Gini coefficient. The higher the number, the higher inequality. So these are the two methodologies that we're using to quantify inequality of opportunity. Now, coming back to our sample, we have collected data from, we're using data from 27 countries, 15 from Mix, 12 from DHS. In the 2009, 2010 to 2022 period, we've recently actually added Vanuatu, which is one of the latest Mix countries. But that wasn't used in this paper because this was published a few months ago. So you'll see results from 27 countries. And here it is. What you see in this figure 3 in our publication, it's all available online. Here we are showing the range, for all the countries, furthest behind, furthest ahead, and the average for children under 5 birth registration completion. So the black dot is the national average, orange is the furthest behind, and the blue is the furthest ahead. So you see that there are some countries on top there, usually from North and Central Asia, or some higher middle income countries where it's like 100%, no children are left behind, everyone is registered. These are, of course, survey results. But then as you go down, you keep seeing that the averages are not going, maybe not that bad here, but the gap between the furthest behind and the furthest ahead starts opening up. And then there are some countries like here you see Nepal, Samoa, Timor-Leste, Laos, PDR, where the gaps are really getting high. And the worst of here we have Papua New Guinea with the lowest average birth registration. We are seeing that on average more than 80% of children under 5 have their birth registered, but gaps are, you see that there's some variance there. Furthest ahead in many of the countries, about half of the countries, they're largely registrations completed. But in 5 countries, fewer than 40% of furthest behind children are registered. So they're really, really furthest behind, and not being registered means, these children are not having access to any type of social protection benefits. Next result is the how we kind of juxtapose furthest behind, furthest ahead information to get it with the dissimilarity index in the scatter plot. So here actually you're seeing the average birth registration completion versus dissimilarity index. So at the bottom right, you have all the countries which have very high birth registration, and they have consequently very low inequality in birth registration among different groups of children. So those are the dark blue countries that we can see here. But then there are some countries where inequality is very high and the average birth registration is quite low. So we see Pakistan, Papua New Guinea, Laos, PDR, Samoa, Afghanistan, and alike. And then
5 minutes. 5 minutes left.
Thank you. So what we want to what we present next is to zoom into who are furthest behind and what are the key characteristics of those children. So which circumstances, household or child or parent level circumstances, which ones interacted in a way to identify those furthest behind. So you see here the results for countries where there is an issue, because as you've seen earlier, there are some countries where there's no furthest behind. So they're eliminated already, but we are focusing on countries where there is a furthest behind and they're significantly behind. And these are the circumstances that we use in explaining inequality. So the wealth of the household, residence of the household, education of the mother, child's age, mixed countries have it in months, DHs in years, number of children under 5, and the sex of the child, gender of the child. And we can also report on the size of the furthest behind group in the population. So what you see, the main kind of like news is that wealth matters. So in most of the countries, we are seeing that furthest behind children are coming from poorer households. The next one is age. In many countries, and really in many countries, we are seeing that this is an issue of children under 1 not being registered, even though there are laws for children to be registered after 15 days or 30 days or maximum 90 days of their birth. But because we don't get to see when were they registered, which could maybe be an amazing question to add, if it's possible to kind of verify that. We don't exactly know if this relates to children who are like in the first kind of month period, but we are seeing that most of the time children left behind are under 1. Mothers with lower education, more children in the household, they're also popping up. And in some cases, we are seeing girls being left behind. In others, it's boys. So there's no trend there. But that's kind of like an overview of what sort of circumstances are do matter in finding out the worst of group. And we do this also over time in countries which have multiple rounds of surveys. So in some countries, we see things are getting better, like at the bottom here, Philippines, Vietnam, Nepal. The gap between the average and the furthest behind children are narrowing down. There are some countries where there's not much change, but they're almost like complete registration anyways. And there are a few countries where gaps are widening, like Afghanistan and lower PTR. Final slide. So policy recommendations. ESCAP does a lot of work on birth registration. That's not our team, actually. Our statistics division does a lot on CRVS. And from their work also, and in this work, we're seeing that the incentive, the positive carrots work much better in birth registration. This methodology we used in Fiji, and we in fact almost, I cannot say rigorously, but if we had time, we could use regression discontinuity design to evaluate a recent policy that was enacted in Fiji that had a sharp design incentivizing parents to register their children. And we see that even using this methodology, we see that kids born 1 year before that policy and 1 year after is a gigantic difference between the two. So it's important to use the carrots more than the sticks. Sticks can even postpone birth registration decisions. And we think that methodologies like this can help to visualize and showcase, demonstrate the gaps, inequalities in this important SDG indicator, which sets the stage for other inequalities in education and health in the future. So I stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think we have a few. This was great. You just gave us a couple more of minutes extra, like for questions. So I would like to open the floor for questions. I don't think we have any questions in the Q&A by participants. But please, if anyone has any questions for any of the presenters or any comments or reactions, please share them in the Q&A. Maybe in the meantime, I can just maybe ask Manar if maybe this is also related. I think it's really great to see, and we have seen other papers in this conference about analyzing the child discipline data and trying to look also at disciplinary methods and their impact on children, which I think it's a contribution to at least starting to open a conversation in many countries and places where it's assumed that because certain disciplinary methods are traditionally or culturally acceptable, then they are fine, right? And so I think this is helping open the conversation. But maybe in relation to John's also sort of like criticism or like observations about the limitations of the module, I wanted to ask you also if you found any challenges in working with this data or with the in the analysis that you've done across countries, any limitations or that you may have noted or any challenges. Thank you.
Yeah, I was just using the same definition for indicators as in mix and as in the SDG. So I did not consider any of of the issues described in the previous presentation. My thinking, the design of the module asks about if the caregiver or the mother or anyone in the household. So it's this bit that is making me always thinking about the appropriateness of associations that we would look at. Even when we look at the mother or caregiver who have responded to the questionnaire, okay, and we look at the association between education and the disciplinary method, I don't think this is captured, might not be captured appropriately, because maybe the mother has nothing to do with the discipline of the child because somebody else is taking care of this. So your question is about the challenges in terms of data use and things like this. I don't think I had any issues here. I was looking at the belief, or the attitude question embedded in the mix. And that question is asked only for one of the children. What I have noticed is that after I have filled in the missing pieces, let me explain again. So that belief question was asked for only one child of the mother, but we can assume that it's the same answer for the other children. I have observed that there are many other missing values for this. So I wasn't sure why that was the case. So that was a challenge that I need maybe to look at and explore further. I hope I have answered your question.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I just wanted to share, I wanted you to share some of your, insights in working with the data. Do you have any question in the Q&A, or you want to just... Okay. Did you have a question? Okay. I also maybe just coming to Selsah's presentation and your work with, I know you have some policy recommendations for countries, and you mentioned the specifics of Fiji. I was wondering to what extent you have, engaged with, countries and what's been, if any, the response from, in terms of, your analysis and the how useful it is to target, right, the specific population groups, and, how feasible it is to use this kind of an analysis and, to inform policy. Maybe you can speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, thank you, Eva. So we are in difficult situation sometimes because we don't have any kind of expertise in all these different indicators. So when it comes to the policy recommendation, we look at birth registration, but we also look at access to clean fuels, and totally completely different policy recommendations, and we need to really go into our other divisions' work too. And so I think the short answer there is that we work with other partners in kind of working with the governments when they need help, but so far they're mostly using this for reporting purposes. We haven't seen much of uptake when it comes to designing something new. The area where we're seeing this more being picked up, potentially coming in the next year, is more in social protection. So as UN, UNICEF is together with us, and it's a big supporter in this ILO, UNICEF together. Social protection should be for all, and we are also very careful when we talk about targeting or prioritizing. Of course, access to services, and these should be universal, right? It's not. But then there could be, maybe it's better to understand who's particularly left behind. But yeah, so far it's mostly for reporting. We were so happy to verify or validate the policy change in Fiji, how they incentivize. They were giving $500 Fijian to parents if they register their kids, but they apparently did this for 2-3 years, and they discontinued. Even though we see this huge positive impact on birth registration completeness, there was just financial problems, and the government had to discontinue it. So sometimes you see kind of good policies coming up, but then they cannot be continued. But maybe just one thing to add, I'm so happy that we're in the same session with Manar and John. It's great to hear about child discipline, because there's no reason why we cannot add child discipline into our platform, another SDG indicator from SDG 16. And we'll definitely keep in mind the measurement issues, as John mentioned, and also maybe to experiment with the household head education versus the caregiver's education to see how the results change before we push the results to the platform. So thank you so much for inviting us here.
Thank you, Selsah. I did have a final comment also, you know, for John, but I want to give the floor to my colleague Enrique.
No. Okay, apologies as we're both together and make great echo. No, just a couple of very quick things. I agree with the point about looking at the child discipline not only, but as important as it is, on the mother's education, but because for the issues that you described, Manar, in terms of how the questions are asked and the role of the mother, if you did the analysis with wealth quintiles or something like that, that could also be interesting. And then that's the child discipline or violence that the child receives, and it does not depend on the education of the mother, but the situation of the household. That could complement some of what you're doing. That's one. And for Selsah, just one question. As you mentioned social protection, and you did look at some of social protection interventions and child registration, and you have other SDGs for which you have done this analysis, this inequality analysis. Did you do this inequality analysis for social protection? Access to, you know, pensions or access to cash grants or something? Just a yes or no?
We tried. We tried. Can you guys hear now? Okay. We did in a few countries. I think 3 or 4 countries we did. We have a paper on it also. That I think Tonga, Nepal, Georgia, maybe 3 countries where mixed modules asked 4 or 5 questions. They listed a few social protection schemes and asked if people were aware of it, if they received anything anytime or in the past 12 months. I think those were the 3 questions. We did it, but the problem was that it was not too clear who were eligible. So, you know, because not everyone should receive it, right? Like there's sometimes eligibility issues, and some of these programs are not universal. So we didn't quite know the particular program investigated. Was it like maybe a targeted one, conditional one, or universal? But we have a paper I can share with you guys later on. We tried to look at it. Our social protection team was very stressed about this because they're like, this may not work well, but it's something that relates to SDG 1.3, and you know, we're I think even household income expenditure surveys are not doing a great job in capturing social protection, access to social protection. Many people are using administrative data, so we're kind of like in between, but still exploring, experimenting.
Thank you. Please send the paper. There was another presentation earlier today that also looked at the intra-country disparities in social protection. So let's follow up. Thank you. We're certainly way over time.
Yeah, we're certainly way over time, and we need to move to the next session, which is the closing session and the keynote speech session. So I hope that you will be joining online that session. Thank you very much, all the presenters, for your wonderful presentations. Thank you for the participants for joining in. And just a quick reminder that the event is being recorded and will be available via the Mixed Program website and the BPI website. And you know, we look forward to also staying in touch with the authors and learning more about your future work. So John, keep us posted also on your work in Dominican Republic. That's what I wanted to also ask you, because it'd be really interesting to see the results. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yes.